Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Haraldur. I'm the Managing Director of the Iceland Arctic Chamber of Commerce. I want to thank you all for attending our breakout session. Definitely much more of you than I anticipated, so I'm extremely happy. We must have the most distinguished panel or something, or VÍB. My colleague Björn has been a force of attraction. On behalf of the Chamber and VÍB Weatlh Management, I would like to welcome you and of course thank you again for attending our breakout session. I'm going to keep it short. We're a bit behind schedule thanks to our friends before us. We're also recording this, so a bit of a delay due to that. So I'm going to keep it short. The topic of today are the estimated Arctic-related investments over the next 20 years and the infrastructure developments needed to materialize those investments. To give their insights here on the topic, we have four, I would say, exceptional guests. First up is Tara Sweeney, the chairman of the Arctic Economic Council. Then we have Mr. Svend Hardenberg, founder and chairman of Greenland Invest. Following him was supposed to be Hörður Arnarsson, the CEO of Landsvirkjun, the Icelandic power company, but he's, I think, boarding a plane at the moment. So we have his colleague, Björgvin Skúli Sigurðsson, Executive Vice President of Marketing and Business Development Division. And to conclude, we have Mr. Stephen J. Henley, Vice President of Subsea 7 Canada. We were also supposed to enjoy the presence of our Minister of Industry and Commerce, Ragnhildur Elín Árnadóttir, but she unfortunately had to cancel, but sends her best regards. I assure you she was planning on attending, so this wasn't a cheap PR stunt on our behalf. So just to keep things going, Tara, the floor is yours.
Cozy in here. Good evening or good afternoon. Thank you to the Icelandic Arctic Chamber of Commerce and VÍB Weatlh Management for the opportunity to participate in this breakout session. In my professional capacity, I am the Executive Vice President of External Affairs for Arctic Slope Regional Corporation, Alaska's largest locally owned company. It's owned by approximately 13,000 Inupiat Northern Alaskan Inuit shareholders. I assumed the chairmanship for the Arctic Economic Council in April of this year, and we have been busy building the organization from the ground up. Together with AEC's Vice Chair, Tero Varasti, tomorrow at the plenary session, we will be providing an overview and a progress update for the Arctic Economic Council. If you'd like additional information, please reach out to me throughout this conference. I welcome the opportunity to meet you. Through many years of discussions and negotiations, the Arctic Council formalized the establishment of the Arctic Economic Council, also known as the AEC, in 2014. It was a hallmark of the Canadian chairmanship. The Arctic Economic Council sets the table for the Arctic business community to have a meaningful voice in the responsible and sustainable economic growth of our homelands. The underlying principles for the creation of the AEC were to create a new, independent forum of business representatives to facilitate Arctic business-to-business activities, promote responsible economic development, and provide a circumpolar business perspective to the work of the Arctic Council. We also have a strong interest in facilitating responsible trade and investment in the Arctic through collaborative fora that convene financial experts and potential investors with the Arctic Economic Council. We are a resource for Arctic and non-Arctic stakeholders. In just a few short years, the Arctic region has exploded in popularity and is recognized as the largest emerging market opportunity in the world. The eyes of the world are looking north with massive interest in gaining a foothold into this growing region. And today my message is simple: go local. On the screen you will see illustrations of Arctic life. It is to remind you that this beautiful region has the greatest resource available to any potential investor, and that is the local perspective, knowledge, and insight. The value that local alignment adds to any project is often overlooked. The people of the Arctic are your local experts. We understand the challenges of an unforgiving climate. We know the natural and political environments. We're subject matter experts with a vast knowledge base that should be valued at a premium. Our people build icebreakers, lead the industry in oil and gas practices, power entire country with renewable resources. We are small and medium businesses striving to promote our communities and Arctic livelihoods. We are successful commercial and traditional marine harvesters. We operate data centers, and we are building a strong generation of scientists and engineers. We are businessmen and businesswomen who also hunt, fish, and gather. The common thread that ties all industries together is that Arctic locals have a deep love for and commitment to the environment in which we live. Understanding the expertise of the Arctic is important as the success of the investment as capital. It is important to recognize that the Arctic is not one homogeneous region, and a one-size-fits-all approach to investment and infrastructure development is not feasible. While the Arctic nations share a common latitudinal number, there are truly 4 faces to the Arctic: the Russian Arctic, the Nordic Arctic, the North American Arctic, and inlaid across those geographic masses is the indigenous Arctic. What may work in Tromsø, Norway, may not work in Inuvik, Canada. For that matter, what works in Wainwright, Alaska, may not work in Barrow, Alaska. There is a granularity to our differences as well as our similarities. Respecting this is important. Recognizing and appreciating those differences underscores the importance of going local first. While many are looking to the Arctic and working their agendas to influence policy or impose their ideology in the name of investment, I respectfully remind you that the Arctic does not need saving. We need partners. We need responsible partners interested in joining us in responsible stewardship of this high potential, high risk, high reward region that many of us call home. When looking ahead to 2035, the only constant that we will know is change. Our communities will look different, and so will the opportunities. In Alaska, the communities from my part of the state are entirely dependent upon oil and gas development, some communities mining, and others commercial fishing. These industries power our homes, build our schools, fund our police and fire protection, and provide meaningful employment opportunities. You will find similar circumstances in different industries across the Arctic. The reality is, economies that were viable may transition into sustainable. Those that are struggling today may face deeper challenges in 20 years. Considering the 4 faces of the Arctic, the answer will be different in each one. I believe there are 3 major challenges facing northern communities that include governmental geopolitical dynamics that may impede cross-border collaboration, an uncertain regulatory environment for business growth, and access to patient capital. Geopolitical posturing is working its way north, but I remind this audience that resolution of conflict is even part of the Inuit value system, because in the Arctic, cooperation is essential to survival. We're not a shrinking people. We have histories and lifeways that overcome great challenges. Businesses also need certainty to minimize the risk in order to pursue projects or to invest or reinvest in the Arctic. And dealing directly with the closest stakeholders in any project is the perfect de-risking agent. Incentivizing investors to go local inherently reduces financial, social, and the environmental risk of Arctic infrastructure investments by leveraging an expert knowledge base, as well as building local alignment for projects. And finally, access to patient capital aligned with local interests, practices, and ideology may prove challenging for massive projects, but there is a great deal of capital, financial and otherwise, to be found in Arctic partnerships. Arctic businesses, communities, and residents should not be viewed as mere tools to achieve an organizational goal, but rightly viewed as experts and potential partners. Far too often in the Arctic, we have seen outsiders working to impose their views on how we should live, behave, protect, invest, or conduct business in the Arctic. To further drive home that point, in the Arctic, we do not need policies, protocols, or ideology imposed on us. Planning for the future for a robust Arctic needs to be done with us. After all, the best brand ambassador is a local one. Infrastructure investments in the Arctic will require investors to take a long-term approach because the pan-Arctic opportunities will likely not fit the traditional private equity model due to their longer maturity duration. There appears to be an organic evolution between Arctic infrastructure investment needs and patient capital because of the potential for long-term annuity-style returns as well as tangible asset content. This type of capital investment is more apt to contribute to sustainable economies rather than the quick buck. In conclusion, looking ahead 20 years, I envision an Arctic that is digitally connected, with a regulatory climate conducive for continued responsible economic development projects balanced with equally responsible environmental stewardship. Strategic business partnerships with local Arctic stakeholders, affordable energy sources, a premium placed on indigenous and local knowledge, and a robust workforce, regardless of which face of the Arctic our residents reside. The Arctic Economic Council can serve as a conduit to these goals and will continue to provide a meaningful business perspective to the Arctic Council and other organizations. The AEC way stands on the principles of collaboration, partnership, innovation, and peace. And as chair, I extend my hand in that same spirit, and I look forward to this journey together. Thank you.
Hi. Thank you for the invite. I was really looking forward to try to give you some insights of the opportunities in our country. So I just flip through the presentation as quickly as possible because as I speak it through, you might even catch up with me in reading through the slides. So I'll just keep it quick and short, and we can always do the questions and answers afterwards. First, I will give you an insight on Greenland in the overall figures, some insights on our economy today, and of course coming projects. That might be why there's a little turn up here, and maybe also a solution to try to boost our economy and the projects. As you see on this picture, we see ourselves as the center of the Arctic. And if we give you some figures so you understand what Greenland is all about, we are about 56,000 inhabitants, distributed all over the island. We have a very small population density, and in the capital we are 16,000 inhabitants, so we are more or less the same size as Akureyri, if there's Icelanders in here. So an ethnic group, 88% is born in Greenland, and we have a parliamentary system, democracy, and we have had self-governing since 1979, and we moved towards further independence or further self-governance in 2009 when we were introduced to the self-rule. We have a GDP on 1.8 billion, that's 2012 figures, and per capita is 37,000 US. We have a 0% growth rate last year. We anticipate it will rise in 2015. We have a fairly small inflation rate. Our fiscal budget has an income on 1.5 billion US. We have expenditures in the same region. And we receive a block grant from Denmark on 0.55 billion a year. We have exports receiving 0.43 billion, and we have a much larger import, as you can see. Our main export partners is Denmark and Iceland. Industry, we are mainly relying on fish processing. And then we have some mining through the years, and there's also mining projects arising. The challenges, well, as you saw before, our growth rate is 0.0 in 2014. It was negative through some years. We have a fairly high unemployment rate. It's declining as it is, but still it's a challenge in our economy. We have a fairly low export rate, and of course, as you saw before, a very high import rate. And resources have a tendency to be exported without any added value in Greenland, and that's an issue. The challenge is, of course, to boost our economy and to get Greenlanders to get a fair share of participation. It is a real challenge if you open up the economy and welcome big companies to do development in the country without local participation, because then we'll see the issues arise as it has been all over the rest of the world in developing countries and so forth. So we should try to avoid that. As Tara said before, we need partners in developing our economy. Well, the focus areas is to create a larger revenue base from the mineral sector, fisheries and tourism. There's a lot of focus on what Iceland has done through the years. That's also why our minister earlier today, said there's a very big focus on opening up the infrastructure in regards to renewing the investments in the sector in regards to harbors and airports. There's a process in modernizing and rationalizing our public sector, and the main focus is that in that is to utilize the new technologies to secure the current basis of welfare and service levels without increasing the cost. The goal is to decrease the cost of that. It's also a focus area to apply long-term and holistic thinking when planning public investments. So it is an area that we are looking very much into. And all these projects and the development has to be done in a long-term and cohesive way. So this is some of the challenges that we need to impose in regards to the international interest in these areas. If we look at the fisheries, well, our main fishery resource are Greenland halibut and prawns. which mainly is fished on the west coast. There's very little or next to none value added in Greenland. Most of it is exported out, and then it gets treated other places, repacked and everything, and then sold to a higher value elsewhere. The new pelagic species are mainly fished on the east coast, very close to Icelandic borders. But it's always also available in the south and in West Greenland. We have a fairly big resource on some of these species, and when the resource is fished, it's sailed to Iceland, again without value added. There are no factories today as it is to accommodate these new species, but there's projects underway. There's still some year ahead, but it is an undeveloped area and can give a needed contribution to the economy when we are talking about taxation and everything. Resource taxation is a fairly new concept within the fisheries, but it is here to stay. We see it on the fiscal debates, the negotiations about the fiscal budgets, but it is an area that has been implemented, and we'll see it on other species also in the next coming years. Our process has been started to reform the sector. It has been underway for 10, 12 years. And the main inspiration to this reform work is gathered from the North Atlantic countries. We're looking very much towards Norway, Iceland, and the Faroe Islands. But the main method hasn't been defined yet, so it's still underway. And there's a need to look at the resource in a broader context than when we're just looking at Greenland or the countries themselves when we're looking at the North Atlantic. There's a very big protectionism still in the area when we're talking fishery in Iceland, in the Faroe Islands, and we also experience that in Greenland. But we need to take a step back and look on the area in a broader perspective to gain some more positive development of the area. So, when we're looking at infrastructure, there's a political and administrative will to enhance the public investments in this area, and it will serve as means to boost the economy and to secure jobs and to secure a basis for growth in the private sector. You always would look at investing in the infrastructure, and then business will follow. That's the thumb rule in this. On this fall session in Parliament, the government will put forward their plans to build 3 new airports and to extend 2 existing ones. The plan might include related infrastructure projects such as ports and other smaller airports, etc. But it depends on the internal political negotiations on this main process. And the first debate is scheduled to be held on November 12th. So many of us will look at this debate with big expectations. In any sense, there is a very interesting area in regards to construction that needs to be put out there. So, and this means that there are coming projects which can elevate further cooperation between Greenland and other countries to a new level. We are planning on big infrastructure projects, as I told you before, so there's possibilities there for international companies to come in and make competitive bids on some of these projects. In regards to flights, some of the areas on the aviation area are ruled by service contracts, and they have been recently extended for another year. This means that the existing service contracts will be renewed as of January 1st, 2017. And there seems to be valid competition now on those contracts, so we are following that development very closely. And what our anticipation is that the government, in regards to the renewal of these contracts, they might aim for longer-term contracts, maybe 5 to 10 years, to give stability in the area. Because such a big country and so many cities and settlements spread out on the whole island gives issues in regards to the infrastructure. So this means that our government is subsidizing some of it very heavily. So this is also something that you have to keep in mind when you're looking at our country and the challenges that are there, but also the possibilities. If we look at the investment needs, at this point, there are this following known needs in the infrastructure area when we're talking about airports and ports. There's a need now that's anticipated to be 0.38 to 0.78 billion over a period of 7 to 10 years. And in regards to the fisheries, well, there's a lot of potentials there, and we haven't done all the math yet, but it's actually dependent on the actual projects, because there's a lot of development need in the sector, and there's companies that are in that area themselves, but they are reluctant to renew fishery fleet and so forth in this sector, and that means that they need some stability first in regards to when we're talking on quotas and so forth. So, but what we can see now in our initial assessment is the government can at this point finance the infrastructure projects themselves when or if they are landing in the lower end of this, these amounts that I spoke of first. But if the cost goes up and above the mean level, the financing will be a heavy priority on the fiscal budgets. So there needs to be a lot of negotiations in regards to how to finance the projects. And that's why private-public partnerships could be very interesting to look at in regards to this. The government is inviting entities to join in on this area. But there are no major institutional investors currently present in our country. And there's none making serious or early bids in regards to negotiation for investment of some of the mentioned projects or sectors. And I want to highlight there's a very serious first mover advantage present in this. If you go in and are interested in going into a dialogue with our government or other entities to finance some of these development projects, I think you can get fairly good fairly good yeah, not necessarily returns on it, but yes, but also the terms for the actual agreements done on this area. So you will experience that there's a very positive interest towards such entities entering this area. An investment fund could be an answer in that regard. I have, through the years, tried to put that idea out there that you need to look at this area in a way that's common in other areas, that you might not just look at, for example, infrastructure projects, but projects or financing in regards to a wider area. Because if you're putting up an airport, there might be interesting projects in regards to putting up hotels, accommodation, restaurants, you know, everything that follows if a thriving tourist industry kicks off after such projects. So defining an investment fund in that regard could be interesting. To form an investment fund with specific focus on Greenland could be the answer to this, because Greenland, as it is, and it's a big wish for us to go forward in developing our economy and getting more and more independent in the same process. So I would like to stress that if somebody wants to go forward with this, you have to act now if you want to get aboard, because there is some initial interest in the area. But as I also said before, nothing has been finalized yet, and the initial negotiation hasn't been done yet. But there is some movement in that area. So this was some of my insights in regards to the opportunities, but also some of the challenges that are in this area. So I will be answering questions afterwards. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Björgvin Sigurðsson. I come from the National Power Company of Iceland, Landsvirkjun. I thank you all for being here, and I thank VÍB Weatlh Management for hosting this event, and in the Arctic Circle as well for inviting us to speak here. The speaker that was supposed to be here is not present. His name is Hörður Arnarsson. He is the CEO of Landsvirkjun. Contrary to what Haraldur said, actually Hörður is coming off of a plane, and this is why he was delayed. So I'm lucky enough to be here to talk to you, and you unlucky enough to have me here instead of Hörður. And if he shows up, I'm not giving up the podium now that I'm here. Now, I wanted to tell you first very briefly about Landsvirkjun. We are the National Power Company of Iceland, owned by the Icelandic state. The company was founded in 1965. The electricity system in Iceland is quite unique in that it's all renewable already. There are reasons for this that I will come on to, and 80% of our power is consumed by power-intensive industries. Now, I wanted to use this talk to put the Arctic and the infrastructure of the Arctic in context with the Icelandic experience of using and utilizing renewable energy. So that's what I wanted to focus on, and I wanted to project how Iceland has been developing its resources in this field and how that might affect the Arctic in the coming decades. First thing to note is to show Iceland's view of the world. Iceland tends to believe it's in the center of the world, as do many other countries, but it's probably closer to the truth to say that this is an adequate or better picture of where the center of the world is, although my American friends would say that this is the wrong continent, and certainly the people from China and India and Asia might rightfully claim that theirs is the true center of our societies. But the reason for putting this up here is number one, to show you that the Arctic is generally regarded as a very remote part of our human society, if it's counted in at all. And you can see that Iceland is barely visible in this picture. But in context of renewable energy, the issue is that the areas where the most renewable energy resources can be found are actually not where people are living. It's around the equator, where the sun is a very powerful resource, and close to the Arctic, where you have hydropower, where you have wind, and where you have other resources that you can access. And this presents quite an interesting challenge for people to utilize renewable energy to the extent that we might wish. For the Arctic, the resources consist mainly of water, the rain, the snow, and the glacial melts that we have in this area of the world. We have wind more than most other places in the world. We have geothermal energy, and we have solar power, the half of the time of the year where the sun shines in this part, less of course in the other places. And this is a picture here of Vatnajökull, the biggest glacier in Europe. It's located here in Iceland, and it's utilized by Landsvirkjun partially to collect snow, and then we harness the energy when the snow melts and we store the energy in our hydropower reservoirs to produce electricity when the need arises. Now, this is a picture of Iceland, and we are, as I say, have been very successful in building out our renewable resources. This is a picture there of Europe's biggest glacier, Vatnajökull. I wanted to put this into the context of the Arctic. Look at Greenland here, and then think about the resource potential that we have simply in the snowpack that's present in Greenland. And then if we take it a step further, if you think about the hydropower and the wind power that's present on this picture, I hope you start to realize the value that we might have and the resources we might have here available for us as human societies and to satisfy the needs for power. Now, the challenges for the renewable energy in the Arctic is that it's remote, these places are sparsely populated, and we're facing the biggest technical challenge that humankind faces today, the inability to store and transport electricity in large scale. Now, this is not something we think of usually, but I can assure you that the greatest minds of the world are certainly focusing on this issue, and this is a case in point. Tesla's Powerwall, Elon Musk and Silicon Valley are head over heels trying to figure out ways to store electricity. So how does the world store electricity to the extent that it can? And you might think that batteries are the way to go, and I tell you, you are wrong. Over 99% of electricity that's stored in the world, large scale, is done with the oldest known technology, hydropower. This is a picture of the electricity mountain in the UK. This is a pump storage where they take the water from down below and they pump it up into the mountains. This happens during the night when there is little power need in the system in the UK. So they use the excess power to pump water into the mountains. A very basic process indeed, one that loses you about 25 to 40% of the power that you use to pump it up. That amount of power is lost when you then let the water come down again. And yet this station is a vital backbone to the UK's power system. Another example, the biggest hydropower storage facility in the world in Bath County. This was commissioned in 1995. It has a capacity of 3,000 megawatts. This is more than the whole power system in Iceland, for example, and yet it was not able, or would not have been able to support the electricity surge that happened in the UK, for example, when the UK was playing Germany in the playoffs in the World Cup in 1994. The power surge that happened there was in excess of 3,000 megawatts. When the game came to a close, everyone in the UK went to the bathroom and they went to open the fridge to get the beers and everything. The power surge was over 3,000 megawatts over a period of 15 seconds. This is one of the later power pump storage systems in China. One of 6 that they have commissioned since the year 2009. The Chinese are well aware of the importance of being able to store power large scale, and the only technology known to mankind to solve that problem. So, for the renewable energy resources of the Arctic, the problem becomes that the power that's available in the Arctic is stranded. The power cannot easily be transmitted or brought somewhere else. That's the problem. And the solution in Iceland that we started working on many decades ago, and I can hear that Svend here is obviously thinking about as well, instead of taking the power somewhere else, we brought industrial use to Iceland. And this way we could use the natural resources by bringing the usage to our shores. This, of course, requires that all other transport happens by sea, and the infrastructure that we required were harbors and industrial parks. And I show you the picture of the first aluminium smelter in Iceland. This is the groundbreaking aluminium smelter of Rio Tinto Alcan in Straumsvík, which you drove by on your way here to Reykjavik from Keflavik Airport. this was the genesis of the Industrial Revolution in Iceland. It only happened in 1965. That's as recent as the history of Industrial Revolution in Iceland is. Here is a picture of Grundartangi, which is not far from Reykjavik either. The same story there. We've built out the infrastructure and harbors to take on the aluminium smelter of Norðurál, and Elkem, which is a ferrosilicon factory. And this is our latest aluminium smelter operated by Alcoa in the eastern part of Iceland. So to be able to bring this infrastructure and the investment here, there are three main things that have to be in place. It has to be technically feasible, it has to be commercially feasible, and then you have to have the political will and acceptance to actually drive this project through. So the second phase of industrial use here in Iceland came through transportation by air. As it happens, Iceland is quite uniquely located when it comes to air transportation, and this allows us access to higher valued markets or markets that can command higher value products. The seafood industry, for example, is a good example of an industry that's using more and more power because they can bring their products to market via air. Another sort of interesting side issue here is that better airport transportation means that power-intensive industries, they can locate to Iceland because they know they can move their own experts to Iceland very quickly. It doesn't take them, 24 hours or 3 days or something to move here. And this is a picture of Iceland's network and the center of Iceland being the center of the world. We have a uniquely well-situated country for air travel between the EU, Europe, and the US, and we've certainly enjoyed that. Now, this of course didn't come about for the renewable resources, and actually this, to a large extent, came about because of the ingenuity of the Icelandic people. Icelanders, and this is not very well known, but Icelanders, there were people from Iceland that founded the low-cost airline industry business model back in the 1960s. And the reason was that we were able to operate by using a hub in Reykjavik. This is Loftleiðir, the airline that used this loophole, if you wish, because we were fiercely opposed by the large carriers of Europe and America, but there was the political will to actually maintain this link and allow Iceland's Loftleiðir to operate out of this airport, flying through New York and then into Luxembourg on the other side. So here's another example where it was technically feasible to build airports and use the airplanes. It was commercially feasible, and there was political will and acceptance to actually make this happen. The third wave is data communications. Now, I'm sure all of you know about the great, vast increase in the usage of both the internet and technology. We have enjoyed that here in Iceland, because what's happened is that we have been able to build data centers here, and all of a sudden we don't need harbors anymore to move the products. The products are actually moved by fiber optic cables underneath the ocean. Actually, this is the best. This remains my favorite quote when it comes to the size of the data center industry. Here is a report actually from 2013. The use of the cloud as we know it today is equivalent to the combined electrical generation of Japan and Germany. That's the scale of this industry back in 2013. By 2015, they were projecting that we would use, or the cloud would use as much electricity as lights across the whole world was using back in 1985. And Iceland has certainly enjoyed and been able to enjoy this because we are connected. We have fiber optic cables connecting us both into Europe and into the US, and this has been a great opportunity for the build-out of power-intensive and renewable resources in Iceland. But of course, this hinges on the infrastructure of fiber optic cables to the country. And this is a picture of from our good friends at Verne Global. This is a data center that's operated here in Iceland, a unique data center that's still in growth mode and has great potential, and we are very proud to have them as our clients for their power needs. So again, we come to the same lineup of the issue or the The data communications, they thrive in Iceland because of technical feasibility, commercial feasibility, and political will and acceptance. Now, I wanted to move on to interconnectors, which is something that's relatively new, if only for the fact that it's only been only in the past 10 to 15 years that it might be possible to connect areas like the Arctic into the mainland grid systems for power. The problem in the Arctic is that a lot of the resources we have are not suitable for industrial use because they're intermittent. If the wind doesn't blow, then you don't have electricity. So you need interconnection for these systems to actually make sense. So the solution basically is to de-strand our stranded renewable resources by connecting them to other systems. These ideas are still in the works. This is a picture from Desert Tech, the Desert Tech project where they are thinking about bringing solar power from the deserts into Europe. And you can actually see the connection to Iceland there as well. This is the latest 10-year network development plan done by ENTSO-E in Europe, which has a link, an interconnector to Iceland on the map, and which is being worked on. This is a project called the North Atlantic Energy Network, which proposes to connect the Faroe Islands, Norway, Iceland, and Greenland to utilize the resources of these countries. This actually is a slide from the State Grid Corporation of China, showing their thought process about how they envision utilization of the Arctic and their grand vision to promote scale and intensive development of wind power at the North Pole. And here's another picture of the same, which shows you that we here in Iceland, or people just in the Arctic, are not the only ones thinking about the vast resources that we have available in the Arctic to us. In addition to new power resources, having interconnections allows us to utilize better the existing resources that we have. I wanted to show you a picture taken at 10 o'clock this morning. This is Iceland's biggest waterfall. It happens beneath the power plant of Landsvirkjun, the company that we have. The problem is that we have filled the reservoir, the Kárahnjúkar reservoir, which is just above there. So all of the water that's coming into the system is now flowing over. We have no buyers for this electricity. We have no means to make value out of this resource. And it's quite interesting that at the same time that other countries are trying to build out new resources, we are pouring them without using them into the ocean. On carbon emissions and climate change, it is clear that for the countries that require power and want renewable power, linking into the Arctic is going to make them enable them to reduce their dependence on fossil-based power generation. And in general, pooling resources, as we all know, improves reliability and the security of supply. And just to point this out, when Jean-Claude Juncker was, before he was made the head of the European Commission, his mission statement included number 2 on his list of priorities to build out better infrastructure for Europe and to increase the share of renewable resources because this is needed for Europe. So, as for interconnectors, we don't have any interconnectors in Iceland, nor does the Arctic in general. So we are still in a phase where we are working out the commercial feasibility and the political will and acceptance for a project of this size. Now, I'm not going to keep you any longer, but as departing thoughts, in the experience of Landsvirkjun and the experience of Iceland over the past 50 years in our quest to build out the infrastructure that's here in Iceland, we believe that for the Arctic, to build on a stranded power base, we need to find ways to invest in harbors, industrial parks, and airports, and to enhance the data communications. And then when we develop further, to de-strand these resources to make them truly valuable for all of us. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Good afternoon. My name is Stephen Henley, and I'm the Vice President of Subsea 7, responsible for Canada. To put it in perspective, the Canadian territory ranges from Victoria Island through the Chuktik Sea, the Canadian Beaufort, Davis Strait, west coast of Greenland, ending up in the Atlantic provinces. Haroldur tasked me with answering two questions today. One, why is Subsea 7 in Canada? And two, to suggest some opportunities, infrastructure opportunities for Iceland, and some advice on how to capture them. I'm going to certainly answer question number one. And in question number two, I'm going to share a variety of infrastructure, because I'm going to leave it up to you Icelanders to decide on what you want to capture. I'd like to thank Tara for the solid platform she first spoke to, because we believe in that as a company as well. A little bit about Subsea 7, just who we are. We're a seabed to surface engineering and construction company, servicing the offshore energy industry worldwide. We also are probably the world's leader in offshore wind farm installation. As you can see, we reside in all petroleum hydrocarbon producing regions in the world. And our moniker is truly, and we live by it, globally aware, locally sensitive. Where we operate, we build up local families of expertise and invest in people, local infrastructure. I'm pretty proud to say that the Canadian office of Subsea 7 has only one foreign national. The remainders are repatriated or born and bred Newfoundlanders. And I'd like to see the same in Reykjavik someday. Just to put it in perspective, about 3.5 hours southeast of here is the province of Newfoundland and Labrador. It was only September 1991 that the Hibernia development plan was agreed between three levels of government. Compared to the British sector and the Norwegian sector, as you see, we haven't had very many exploration wells. However, we have been blessed with a high discovery rate. We have 54 significant discoveries out of 207 wells, which is about 1 in 4, with an industry average that is 1 in 10. Offshore Newfoundland is a subarctic region. As you can see from the far left, that was iceberg concentration May 2015. Hence, our offshore developments have to take into account historical and present threat of icebergs, not to mention the three most serious mid-ocean plays in the world are the West of Shetland, South China Seas, and the Grand Banks of Newfoundland. So we get wind, wave, fog, and ice thrown in. However, we do use a variety of technologies to mitigate the risk of ice. And over the last 20 years, more and more are being developed. We have 3 major producing fields, the 4th under development, and the 5th now with Statoil in the Flemish Pass in pre-development. So if we take the population of Newfoundland, is about 500,000 people. Like Iceland, about 50% live in and around St. John's. So phenomenal economic impact. 25 years ago, St. John's, Newfoundland was a primary resource developer, not much secondary industry. Poorest province in Canada, highest unemployment rate. Now we're a net contributor to Canada. And one needs to realize that if you look at the person years there, the indirect multiplier for direct extraction jobs is 8 to 1, which is phenomenal. Has it changed the face of Newfoundland? It absolutely has, and I'll touch on some of that as I go through it. When it comes to infrastructure, there's infrastructure and there's infrastructure. We were, I think, a little wise early on to realize that because of our history, we wanted to invest in centers of excellence to educate young Newfoundlanders and Labradorians. We had a mass exodus. We had a net exodus of young people every year. So seeing that we had a bit of a subarctic and Arctic laboratory for harsh and Arctic, we concentrated on varieties of centers of excellence that are educational, scientific, and research-based. We were fortunate enough to have the National Research Council's ice tank and towing tank offshore engineering basins. We have Seacor's centrifuge. Memorial University has just expanded its engineering department to 2,000 student seats. Marine Institute in Newfoundland has full bridge simulation of flume tanks. What's this caused is concentrating on the smart side of the business, sometimes not necessarily the infrastructure. There's a reason in the industry we refer to structural as dumb iron. So I'm going to leave it at that. Just a couple of examples. It's also an incubator for a lot of other technologies. We all remember that sonar that discovered the Franklin a few months back. Well, that was developed and built in St. John's by a company called Kraken. Another fascinating little company called Go Beyond. Designed, built, and managed and operated the cameras on Cameron's Marianas Trench Dive. So these are cool little offshoots of an oil and gas industry. Now, when it comes to the opportunities, I'm going to leave it up to all you folk to sort of decide where you want to get involved in the value chain. I am going to leave my notes with Harolder, and he can distribute them to his association. But I'm going to give you this little just sort of fun example. The Hibernia grocery list for 1 month, and the POB on Hibernia is 185 people. 900 liters of milk, 135 liters ice cream, 700 pounds potatoes, 850 pounds of fries, 1,800 pieces of fruit, and on and on and on. So there's impacts and there's impacts. Back to the supply chain potential impacts that are going to possibly occur offshore Iceland. Many of the global contractors have a strong presence in Newfoundland and Labrador. They bring in outside investment, buy from smaller companies, and provide technology transfer opportunities. I like to refer to them as a climbing frame for local business. Our company, for instance, have qualified and depend upon a lot of Newfoundland and Labrador service and supply companies. Once they qualify for us in St. John's, they qualify for us around the world. And that's really important. It's important to us, and it's actually very important to those companies resident there. Now, with the potential drilling about to, well, you had some seismic this year, seismic next year, and potential drilling in the next couple of years. There is a long list of activities that need to be up and running here, I would suggest, in about 24 months. I'm not going to run down through all of them. I think pictures speak 1,000 words. But it's everything from helicopter services, fisheries consultants, life rafting servicing, supply vessels, weather forecasting, ice, well, you don't have ice management, crewing services, fuel supply, and on the list goes. And you're going to need to be prepared because adjacency offers a lot of added advantage. I'm a firm believer, as I am a Newfoundlander as well, and those residents who grew up, who understand the environment, know how to get things done well, and wise and sustainably. And I will task Icelanders to do the same thing. It's your home and your environment. Now, to talk a bit about some things that are very relevant to how we've developed offshore Newfoundland. We have a federal provincial legislation and governance called the Atlantic Accord. The Atlantic Accord requires all operators, when they submit a development plan, to have a pre-approved benefits plan. And that's a rather strongly enforced plan by both levels of government and by the community, and by the industry associations as well. It requires local procurement and engineering. So all the project procurement and engineering is resident in St. John's, Newfoundland. You can't have it resident anywhere else. A little bit of advice to Iceland going forward. That's the only way to really capture and grow. As first consideration for all training and employment, first Newfoundlanders, second Canadians. There is a commitment for R&D funding annually based upon a percentage of your revenue from oil extraction. And that has caused a robust investment. Let's face it, it's the future generations that need to benefit from the extraction of hydrocarbon. Back to the smart side of the business. What has changed in Newfoundland? Yes, there's been structural change. There's been infrastructure change. But the real change is no out-migration anymore. It's a positive younger generation who not only know they can there, know they can anywhere in the world. And to see that metamorphosis in 20 years is so exciting. And as a Newfoundlander, that really is what has turned me on about this industry. It's the training, it's the belief, it's the newborn attitude of Newfoundlanders and Labradorians, the young people, that now they know they can, anywhere in the world. So they don't have to leave anymore, but if they choose to, they're competitive wherever they're going. And I think that's the greatest win to date. Yes, the economic impacts have been marvelous. The quality of life has been great. The rise of the cost of living, not so much, but that goes with the territory, as Tara knows. So, yes, adjacency is very important, but don't fall into a sense of entitlement either. This is a globally competitive industry. And a couple of recommendations to the business community. Competitiveness is not just price. I think our banking friends here know that one. Market intelligence. Get it however you can. Market early, market often. Joint ventures are great business models. This is an international business. You have a lot of competent sectors where you can add value to the oil and gas business by bridging through a joint venture with a global company. I highly recommend the practice. It works really, really well. Or go into straight technology transfer agreements. And look to broader markets. When Hibernia was signed in Newfoundland in 1991, I remember entering the business. I was in the finance sector, by the way. I was in the banking industry. And the robustness of your health, safety, and environmental processes and systems is all important. And your quality systems is all important. And they were unknown to us as a primary developer. They certainly aren't now. I was also asked by Hurler to give some predictions. Now, with the price of oil of $49 today, I'm not going to give any predictions about that. I happen to like the quote by the Minister of Petroleum for Russia. Only God knows the price of oil. And I think that's a bit true. And in fact, I'm going to add, maybe on some days he doesn't even know. But here's a prediction. What you're seeing there is what's called the Subsea factory. Most elements of that factory are in place today. Subsea compression actually went in offshore Norway about 10 days ago. So separation, compression is done. Subsea storage hasn't been done at the far top. And what you'll see is no infrastructure at sea level. Everything will be below the sea. It'll be managed from shore. And you'll have remote intervention. You'll have intelligent pipe. And that will be some Arctic infrastructure in 2035. Now, where it may be, I'm not going to venture to guess. But I'll actually give a prediction or two on that. I do suspect Alaska will have one or two of these. I think the Canadian Beaufort may have one. I'm pretty confident to say the Norwegian Barents Sea will have 6 or 7. And I'm highly hopeful that Iceland has at least 2. If you look at where you are in your value chain, I think that would be a good target by 2035. In my spare time, I chair the Board of Trustees of the Canadian Museum of Nature, who are subject matter experts on the Arctic and also on species and change. And this is one of my favorite quotes from the museum. The wonder of the Arctic is not in its physical vastness, but rather in its smallness and its intimacy. And on a personal level, we all share in the burden, and we certainly will share in any success of operating the Arctic. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much for that. All of you for very good talks and fascinating and inspiring speeches. If Harald could maybe flip over to the next slide so we have a good background while we speak. I know that a lot of people are excited to hear from President Hollande, who has been changing the schedule of everybody here in Iceland for the past hours and days. But we are here to discuss not only the potential build-up in infrastructure and what is needed and what is in the foreseeable future, but also who is going to pay for it. and where the money is going to come from. And that is what we are very excited about. We at VÍB Weatlh Management, we have discussed the Arctic, energy sector and so forth quite a lot, and we have been very fascinated by the question of where the capital is going to come from, who is going to pay for this. And my first question to the panel, if I start with Tara to begin with, the balance between the public sector and the private sector. Svend said that there is a potential of a very good partnership between private and public partners, but how do you perceive the necessary steps that need to be taken in infrastructure development in the next years? How much is going to be done by the private sector, and in what manner then?
Thank you for that question. It comes down to regulatory certainty, and certainty for businesses, regardless of whether you're in the oil and gas industry, if you're in the tourism industry, or any industry in the Arctic. It is important to minimize that risk, and it comes down to, from my perspective, regulatory certainty.
Svend, this is a big question for you in Greenland at the moment, hopefully going into some very big infrastructure project, but as you say, you're still waiting for the first movers. Who will they be? Will they be public or private?
Well, hopefully you'll see a combination in that area. My wish for that challenge is that much more private money is going into such projects, because it's possible, and there's challenges in regards to our public sphere to actually finance most of these infrastructure projects. And infrastructure projects in itself are very secure investments. And as our minister earlier today for trade and industry said at his presentation, they are very open for this area to welcome foreign investments. So I think we should try to massage this into the sector, that it is possible to find very sound projects to invest in for private entities. But of course, there are some challenges. Most of the Arctic is uncharted territory in regards to how to invest in those areas. The risk profiles are, in the entity's eyes, non-existent. They have to revisit those again and try to accommodate this new way of thinking of new projects on. So, but hopefully more private money is coming into that area.
Now, Stephen, should that be the role of the public sector, to be welcoming to private money? Should that be the main aspirations of the governments, or how involved should they be in directly funding infrastructure projects?
I can answer that two ways, personally and corporately. I think from a personal perspective and also a corporate perspective, government has a role, and I think the role, as evidenced in our sort of case study, is to support, and as Tara suggested, strong governance, strong regulatory, and if there is need, as there was in Newfoundland, strong public investment in centers of excellence, educational infrastructure, permanent infrastructure on that side, which is everlasting. I'm not talking about investing in industrial infrastructure by government. That's our responsibility. It's the governance and the requirement for skill set training and future requirement government ought to invest in. And I think it's really our responsibility to either partner to help it, and then we take our responsibilities quite seriously on where we need to invest.
Björgvin, how right is he about the importance of having qualified people? Landsvirkjun is a huge player in Iceland in building up mega projects or big projects. How important is it to have the specialty and the people here locally in Iceland? As Tara also mentioned, the importance of the local people.
In the power industry, like we operate here in Iceland, the main aim is not to keep on building power plants, so that cannot be an aim in and of itself. But of course, when we do build out power plants, and we're still in a growth phase, certainly here in Iceland, it's extremely valuable for us to have access to the expertise. To an extent, this expertise then becomes globalized, right? I mean, we have, of course, foreigners that come here as well that have specific areas of their expertise. So, we have to, and in our competitive market, we have to basically find the best people where they are. Certainly, it's great if they're local, and absolutely we support that and try to make it such that we have the expertise available locally to the extent that we can.
Now, there's one good point that I heard about, said about, I think it was Svend who said, first the infrastructure and then the businesses will follow. One of the problems with the Arctic regions is how scarcely populated they are. We don't have a lot of people, so we don't have a lot of infrastructure servicing those people. But in order to bring in the businesses and get the ball rolling, how is that going to be done? Do we need then big projects, industrial projects to begin with the businesses that follow? Or how will this be done? I'm interested in hearing both from you, Tara and Svend, how your predictions are regarding what comes first. What needs to be the first step?
I think there are a series of first steps. One, the Arctic nation needs to have an understanding of where they want to go. What sort of investment opportunities are they looking for? And then to take a look at the potential investment capital that's available, and marrying those two interests. Which comes first? You need to have some clarity and understanding of where you want to go. And as a resident from an Arctic state, an Arctic nation, one of the conversations that we've been engaged with in Alaska, and especially the region that I'm from, is you hear a number of different investment firms interested and genuinely interested in investing in the Arctic, with proclamations of we're coming, we want to invest in various projects without taking it a step further. So understanding what our communities need to have in place to attract the right investment dollars is something that we're currently exploring. But with respect to answering your question, I think there are a series of first steps that need to take place in order to attract the right dollars to the Arctic region. Thanks.
Svend, have the Greenlanders already had this discussion, and do you have it all figured out? Do you know what you need first? How are your emphasis now? You talked about this great emphasis on building infrastructure such as airline travel and harbors. Exactly the same as Björgvin said in his piece, as were vital for Iceland.
Yes. Well, it is on the agenda now in Parliament, and there's a wide understanding that it is necessary to reinvest in the infrastructure. As you said, there's a perceivance that we are not many people in the Arctic. That's true, but there's a lot of resources. You have the energy, a lot of unutilized energy pockets there. Minerals, oil and gas, and the living resource also. So if you're looking besides that in regards to the number of inhabitants in the Arctic, there's a lot of possibilities. And you see a lot of movement in the area of mining, of course, because the resources are there, but the markets are fluctuating. So you just recently had a mine, not in Alaska, but in Canada, opening up iron ore mine. And it's very interesting to follow that, because it's the middle of nowhere, and they don't have the real harbor facilities to accommodate the actual shipping of the iron ore out of there. So they are shipping out in small barrages and shifting it in Greenland waters to bigger ships, but they are actually in a process of dealing with the challenges that they have on the projects and thinking out of the box. So it's just an example on how to accommodate different challenges because the solutions are there. But of course the infrastructure is very, very important, and you could start by for example, our government is putting forward those 5 different airport projects. But what they are aiming at is to start with a length of a runway that accommodate most airplanes in a certain radius of action. And when the passenger numbers arises, they will of course expand the runways. So they're not over-investing, but they're investing in the sector and try to monitor the development in it and then reinvest and reinvest. That's how they are planning to go forward in this area.
A little bit more about that. Who do you think will bring money into these projects? Do you assume that these will be, you said there are no big institutional investors in Greenland. Who are you mainly looking for?
Well, there's a infrastructure project going on right now in our capital, a new harbor. And it's been financed by American pension funds in a very attractive rate. So it's not impossible, but we have to look elsewhere. But it starts to move in the sector. So I think we'll see more and more private movement in that area. But it seems like we have to go out and approach different interests to promote these projects. But I think what we'll experience over the years now, they have an interest in the Arctic, and we will experience that they will come to us more and more often now.
Now, just because we are almost out of time, or just about out of time, I want to ask Stephen, in the end, Tara mentioned that the Arctic was a place for high risk, high reward. Do you share that view, that this should be money flowing into investments in the infrastructure that is ready for this risk?
I think Arctic development, especially for hydrocarbons, should never be looked at as a high risk. It needs to be a very mitigated risk before we even go in there. We are very risk adverse in what we do as a company. Because as you're aware, oil companies over the last decade, and even more so now, since the drop of the price of oil, are pushing all risks to the major contractors. And quite honestly, we wouldn't accept that risk, and we don't. So let's look at the lowest common denominator mitigated risk. That might impact the result of the opportunity, but so be it. It needs to be sustainable and managed and inclusive. And that is, I think, a globally aware, locally sensitive comment from our company as well. And I also personally believe in that too.
Now, maybe just one last question for Björgvin then. Iceland's role in partnership with other Arctic countries, what can we contribute? We are well situated as a country with well-educated workforce and very good infrastructure. Should we consider ourselves to be potential partners to the other Arctic countries?
I can, of course, mostly talk about our experiences at Landsvirkjun in the area of renewable energy, but it's certainly true that Iceland is probably the leading Arctic nation in that area, given that where we are now in the development of our natural resources with respect to renewable energy. So certainly there is a lot of lessons that we have learned that we can then try to project and help other countries with, certainly. And you can just see, I hope that you got the impression that we are moving ahead and we're making progress here that we are extremely proud of. Hard work, certainly, but it's something that, lessons that we can certainly help out with other countries. And with respect to the risk-reward question, I think to a large extent the risks are not necessarily just tied to the regions themselves or difficulty in executing the project. A lot of the risks that we are witnessing is actually in just the commodity prices. The Arctic region doesn't control the oil prices, and yet that's probably the biggest driver for why the projects are there or they're not there. So, and it's the same with renewable energy. The market dynamics are far more powerful than the risks of actually building a hydropower plant in Iceland. The question is about electricity prices over the next coming decades. and giving the emphasis on, on the climate change and the emphasis on, how the world is going to make sure it has security of supply for power, which is, frankly speaking, one of the biggest questions that you have for every nation. How are you going to supply energy for your the population? I think the Arctic is uniquely located to use that opportunity to the best and to the max, and that doesn't necessarily have to have high local risks involved. But that way we connect, get out of those risks by having private capital, and taking on those risks, the market risks themselves.
Yeah, I think these are fitting and very good final words. So I'd like to thank you very much for joining us for this, both you viewing online and here at Harpa, and you for speaking. Thank you very much for joining us. So on behalf of the Icelandic Arctic Chamber of Commerce and VÍB Weatlh Management, have a nice time here at the Arctic Circle conference.